Right, guys, welcome to this evening. This is a delayed evening from a few weeks ago when we got timings a little bit wrong. So anyway, good to finally get it done. And actually, probably based on a lot of the feedback I'm getting from athletes and coaches, and even a few people struggling with the sniffles out here a little bit, I think the timing is probably even more apt actually by it being a few weeks later. I know I'm just coming back from a cold the last few days, so. Greg and James from U-perform have obviously agreed to join us again to give us a bit of their insight into basically coping with winter training in the best possible way. Northern hemisphere athletes, obviously, if you weren't on the call a minute ago, we were just discussing the advantages of being in the sunshine. It's obviously not realistic for us all to be there all year. So although James seems to be managing it quite well at the moment. So guys, I don't know whether you want to kick it off. We've certainly got a list of questions at this end in terms of topics of conversation, but it might be easier if we, integrate some of those as appropriate. If you guys want to sort of give us an overview as to what you're going to discuss tonight. And guys, anyone else on the call, if you use the chat function on Zoom to just fire questions at us, we'll add them to our list of what we'll ask the guys tonight as well. Try and do ask questions. It's so much better when these things are interactive. So, so over to you.
For us, why don't we kick off with some questions? Because I think for me, it's always good if we answer what the questions that people have got. James and I can talk ad infinitum.
Okay.
Perhaps we kick off with those, and then if we think of other things as we go along, we can expand it from there.
All right, I'll roll straight in with I suppose the first one I wrote down was supplementation. There's a whole industry out there worth billions of pounds that want to sell you everything under the sun. We definitely advocate food first approach, but that's food first, not food only. Hardworking athletes, people under a lot of life stress, blah, blah. What's your guys' views on a food first approach, and then supplementing off that, and just a general overview as to how you'd go about that, and then what you change in the winter versus the summer, maybe.
Okay. Really interesting. Greg, do you want to start, or should I?
Yeah, sure. Listen, I'll kick off, and I think food first is exactly the right message to send. I think we live tragically. We've just been talking about having colds. We've just come off the back of a pandemic, and tragically, we live in a society that fundamentally believes that we don't have to bother looking after ourselves. That what we'll do is we'll wait till the wheels fall off, and then we'll try and stick them back on again. And I think actually supplements become part of that. It's a quick fix. I can't be bothered to put the time or effort into food first, and so what I'll do is I'll just try and stick plasters over what is a very poor diet and hope that will suffice. So I think absolutely right is to push the message of food first. And I think that if you imagine, it's like building a house in the sense that the foundations of your nutrition come from what you put in your mouth as part of your diet. And remember, the supplements that aren't immediately part of that diet. They're part of nutrition, but not necessarily part of diet. And so I think making sure that you get your diet right in the first instance is absolutely crucial. So number one, absolutely right. I'm more than happy to chat about what I think a good diet looks like. But then what comes on top of that really is the fact that actually we are incredibly busy. We live frenetic lives. And as athletes, what we are doing is we're pushing ourselves beyond the sort of physiological limits of what normal people are doing. Remember that diet generally tends to stick around what we call RDAs, recommended daily allowances, and those type of things. And actually athletes require more of certain areas. And protein is a great example of that, where we've got a huge protein turnover because of damage that we're causing through training. And so therefore supplements can be very valuable. They can be incredibly cost effective because obviously protein is expensive. But I think more importantly, it's about convenience, is that, we know that protein, for example, the best time to take it is immediately post-exercise within a 30-minute window. We're trying to achieve other things at that time as well, with things like rehydration, micronutrients, etc. And so actually using supplements to both target the timing to ensure that we get the quality of what we're looking for, and also to monitor the quantity is that little bit easier by using supplements. So they can become a very, very convenient support for what is a food first approach. And then on top of that, really what you've got to think about is indication. An indication comes down to the fact is, do I need something specific? And obviously, you know, people on the call tonight across the sort of athletic spectrum require different things at different times of the year. So you guys, for example, are lucky enough to be out in the sunshine this week. But for many people, many Northern Hemisphere people, through the winter months, vitamin D is a critical issue. And there is a global, I mean, it's a really interesting one actually, because I used to do a lot of work in the Middle East, in Qatar, and in Saudi. And it's interesting that they have a vitamin D deficiency problem, because everybody covers up, everybody sits inside their air-conditioned facilities and rarely goes outside. So natural sunlight exposure, really important. If you can get natural sunlight exposure, perfect. If you can't, then vitamin D supplementation may be indicated. And then obviously there are other factors within that, dependent upon what is indicated and what is required. So I think generally my attitude is food first, supplements are a support to a good quality diet. And then just finally, sorry, James, I'll let you in a second. I think finally, what I would say is that, you know, as director of research, I was director of research in the early 2000s, a time where there was an absolute spate of athletes testing positive, many of whom blamed it upon their supplement. And in fact, we undertook a big study, as did the IOC at the time, and effectively found that around about 80% of supplements were contaminated with products that would lead to a positive dope test. And so therefore, at that time, I created a testing protocol with HFL, a company up in Newmarket. That's now been developed and expanded, and is now the informed sport approach, which is something that when you look at our labels, we have informed sport. What matters to us is quality in terms of what's in the product, but also making sure that it is not contaminated, and so therefore safe for use by athletes. So food first, supplements where indicated, and to improve performance and training impulse, and then making sure you get the right product, that's what it says on the tin is in the product, and also that it's contaminant free.
Yeah, I'm going to go along with that, and totally. I'm going to actually add to that a little bit, guys. I mean, I'm a massive food first advocate. You know, my nutritional qualifications were all about food. We didn't look at supplementation. But, you know, when I became a nutritionist at the level I did, we looked at the issues we have surrounding food intake. Now, the problem we have in the developed, overpopulated country we have, that we are literally the most overfed and undernourished population in history. The problems that occur with that is that we have a demand to actually feed some 66 million people in the UK alone. Now, to achieve that goal, what we've actually had to do is, one, import a load of foods. So fresh fruit, for example, bananas from the Caribbean, oranges from Spain, so on and so forth. But we've also had to change our farming systems. So, I mean, I'm sure many of you guys remember in your basic history levels of the 3-field system, when you would plant the field and grow the field for 1 year, repeat the exercise year 2, and then in year 3, you'd let the field rest, and all the macronutrients and micronutrients would then return to the soil. The problem we have now is that in order to feed the population, we've taken down all the hedgerows, we've opened up the fields, it's mass farming methodology. We're using artificial fertilizers and pesticides in order to make this huge amount of food that the population requires. So when you go to the supermarket and you buy your bag of spinach or your lettuce or whatever it is, you're getting a very, very different nutritional input into your body than what you were getting many, many years ago. Put that into perspective. If in 1940, you went and took a serving of spinach, which was what Popeye, the Sailor Man, was based on, the whole concept behind the tin of spinach, used to get 150 milligrams of iron per serving, in a 3-gram serving. Nowadays, that's down to 2 to 3 milligrams of iron. So you're looking at 75 times depletion in the nutritional value. And that's just one classic example. You know, you look at oranges being flown in from Spain, they can be 7 to 10 days from pick to actually even being on your supermarket shelf. So the vitamin C level can drop dramatically during that period of time. And I think this covers across that we're becoming more and more dependent on fast food, convenience food, and processed food. You know, even the fact that you think you're eating healthily with a ham sandwich or a ham and salad sandwich, the reality is the salad you put in has got virtually no or very limited nutrients unless you're growing it yourself. And the ham itself has been processed. So that's what we're up against when you're trying to fuel your body for optimum performance.
So is there a little bit of a, I'm fortunate enough, I live opposite a farm shop that grow a lot of their own fruit and veg. I mean, that's actually quite, I was just saying, I'd read the other day about spinach not being as high in iron as people thought, but what I didn't read was that actually that's a modern farming issue and not how it was. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And just picking up on something you said, Greg, as well, that, as we talking about people, I've mentioned this in calls before, it's bang for your buck, isn't it? And supplements and the cost of them. But when we're in a sport where you finish session and you need some protein afterwards, well, I don't know of any free protein, do you? So, whether that's buying yogurt, buying chicken, buying steak, or buying a recovery powder, I mean, it's because I think I'd not thought of it from that angle myself personally, where you do go, these supplements cost this, and you add it all up, and well, actually, it's required dietary protein or something else you're missing from the diet, isn't it? And actually, I suppose you could argue buying high quality foods might reduce the amount you need to spend on supplements in the end as well. If you're looking food first, so. Interesting.
I mean, that's absolutely right. And it is an interesting one because money does matter. And I think the other end of that spectrum is actually to make sure that and this is something that me and James talk about on a regular basis, because athletes suffer from this dreadfully, and that is that if a little is good, a more must be a whole lot better. And rarely is that true, if never is that true. And of course, invariably, what it ends up doing is producing incredibly expensive urine and feces. So as me and James were talking about this the other day, you might as well flush £20 notes down the toilet, because fundamentally there is no physiologic gain being made from over consuming many of these products. And so I think it's really important to make sure what we and it comes down to what we talk about when it comes to training. It's about planning. And it's about structuring it in the appropriate way and making sure that what you're delivering is you're delivering to target. Going beyond that target when it comes to nutrition is rarely, if ever, valuable.
So one of the questions I'd written down, we can go for, I know Chris has got a question on like being a little bit more accurate as to what you need. But if you look at the typical hard-working, hard-training Northern Hemisphere athlete in the winter months, and you had to say, there's 3 key supplements that, are probably the ones they want to look for. Where would you pitch that to people? And obviously, like, the sunshine one to me is probably one of, number one on that list, isn't it? So,
I mean, if you want, reduce it to 3. I mean, top of the list would be protein. I think without any shadow of a doubt. And I think particularly, on a call like this, when we're talking to endurance athletes, because there is a real penchant in endurance sport that lighter is faster. And so invariably my experience is whenever I work with endurance athletes is they're calorie restricting. And the easiest way to calorie restrict is certainly one of the ways to calorie restrict is to remove protein from the diet, as well as just about everything else. But so generally what you find is people don't have enough protein on board. The winter months in particular are incredibly damaging because of high volume. You've got longer duration, you've got more frequent training, and for multi-sport athletes, that's even more pertinent. So I think I'd put protein at the very top. Part of that protein should definitely include collagen because of the the annual depletion of collagen and the importance of collagen as a structural protein. And what we are talking about is structural damage. I think vitamin D is very high on that, particularly if you work indoors. One of the big problems for us at the moment is that even on a day where you do get natural sunlight, the days are so short that when you're at work, you'll miss out on that sunlight anyway. So again, it's just making sure that if you can get natural sunlight, absolutely fabulous, because that bypasses the requirement for supplementation. But vitamin D would be up there. And I think, to some extent, from a boots and braces perspective, I would suggest a multivitamin, just to tick the boxes on the things that you might be missing out on. The vast majority of those are water soluble. So as I said before, you'll just urinate them out if you don't require them. But I'd tick those three off as being sort of the three key ones during a northern hemisphere winter. And
just on RDA on vitamin D, like what a lot of people, if you look at the RDA suggested, I mean, it's miles off, isn't it? Like especially for a hardworking athlete, because we're actually using vitamin D in muscle contraction, aren't we? So,
and I think one of the big problems with vitamin D. So having worked, a good friend of mine is one of the world's leading authorities on Vit D, who I work with. And I always have a joke with him about this, and that is that the RDA seems to change on a daily basis. I mean, it just, what it used to be is now not what it was, and it'll change next time you have a look at it. And so I think it's making sure that you're taking the right level in. And I think often a lot of supplements, I mean, again, you can get vitamin D really cheap. I would dare to suggest that if it's cheap, there's probably no vitamin D in there. If there is, it's probably the wrong form of vitamin D, and it's probably not in the quantities that are required. So again, that's something at U-perform that we really focus hard on making sure that we've got the right vitamin D in the right quantities. There's a concern with vitamin D that if you overconsume it, it's what's called co-transported with calcium, and that doesn't seem to be the case. And I can tell you in elite sport in this country, vitamin D is one of the key supplements that they use across the board, particularly in endurance sports. So within elite sport in this country, they use it. So I would say it's really important, but the most important thing is to make sure that you get a quality product when it comes to vitamin D. Yes, you can buy it cheap in the high street stores, but to some extent, what you're doing there is wasting money.
Yeah, and you've got to think long term about what you're putting in your body every day as well, haven't you? In terms of like how these, not all these pills are created equal, are they? And again, sadly, if something is incredibly cheap, it's probably because it's poor quality. So, I think when people are listening to this tonight, you very much should be thinking about the quality of everything you're taking, and really, of course, we always go on about, there is a limit to how much everyone will spend. So it's about identifying those key things that will, support your body the best through training and life and all that kind of thing, isn't it? So,
it is, money does matter. But what you want to do is you want to spend as beneficially as possible. And I think that's the thing to it. It's just, if you've got less money to spend, don't worry about that, but still concentrate on quality. Don't try and get the same breadth for cheaper. I mean, because it is counterproductive. So I think focus on quality first, and at least whatever it is that you are using will be delivering on what you are hoping it will deliver.
Yeah, I think guys, a classic example of what you've just been talking about there is if you look at the active gel formulation, it would have been so much cheaper and effectively possibly even a faster formulation route. If we use something like sucrose in the actual formulation, some simple sugars, but we chose to go down to a plant alternative with the agave syrup. And for those of you not familiar with agave, you can buy it in the supermarkets. It's quite expensive alternative to sugar. You more commonly find it in very, very upmarket cocktail bars for making mojitos with. But it's not a cheap option. It's a considerably more expensive option, but it gives you an alternative to that refined sugar that just gives you a spike. And that's a classic. And, and coming back to the other supplementation, sometimes it's a case of looking actually at the formulation. So, vitamin D3 is predominantly sourced from lanolin, which is sheep's wool, which is absolutely great. It's absolutely fine. No problem at all with that. And that's actually what we utilize. The key thing is, how do you bind the tablet together? What other ingredients are there? I mean, I remember looking at a multivitamin and mineral on the marketplace. It's in a high street shop, one of those chains of health food shops that are in the UK. And I was looking down the list of it, and it's a great big tablet. I'm thinking, my word, that's got a lot of stuff in it. And the actual reality check of it was about 40% of it was hay, literally hay from the farmyard. And that's what they were using to bind it together. Packed full of flavorings, colorings, and all that rubbish. And your body has to process that, and your liver has to process these extra toxins they're putting into the supplementation as well. That compromises liver function, which is compromising energy production as well. So it is very, very much a case of you get what you pay for. And in the nutrition world, in supplementation world, the quality nutrition is being quality formulated. And that comes down to taste, flavoring, compatibility, stability, but also the natural carrying agents or the binding agents that we utilize.
Yeah, so obviously the quality thing is like quite high on my agenda whenever I'm looking at these things, because I'll just tell you how, this explaining it to all the athletes on the call. This is how my brain sort of works from a illness and optimizing how you feel and recover point of view. People are dead quick to go, oh, look at that 1,500 quid new disc wheel for my bike. Brilliant. That's great. That will save you 4 seconds over the old deep section wheel you had per hour of your 2-hour rate. It's whereas I've just been ill for a few days. I'm coming off the back of a cold. There's no way I can go and do any of the hard sessions I'm meant to do for a race I've got in 3.5 weeks. Was I taking the right amount of, for example, I probably was a bit slack with vitamin D in between a couple of trips away. Even down to the point, when we're talking tonight about optimizing yourself for the winter, we live in a world where there's hand gels everywhere. And I've opened doors with my elbows for years. This whole COVID thing's just made me look normal instead of abnormal. But actually, that is the reality of it's consistency in your training is probably the number one gain any of us can get. And by supplementing with high quality stuff, that's the right stuff, thinking about the quality of the food you're eating, and also just thinking about staying away from becoming suppressed with an illness and that kind of thing, then and recovering the best you can from training. All these things actually add up to not needing, I've got athletes at the moment that, it was a week off 3 weeks ago. They're just getting back to things and they've caught something else. And you do sort of then, yes, it could be bad luck. The kids have brought it home, but if your immune system is in a good place, you actually could be continuing to train a lot more. And this is actually what we're talking about tonight, isn't it? It's not just, what you can put in yourself because you might be a bit low. It's actually what's the benefit of doing that. And even think, I'm a big one from a hand hygiene point of view, and I'm sat next to Mr. Antisocially. He never gets ill because he never goes near anyone to get ill. So, but yeah, Chris, I think did you have a question on
Yeah, a couple of questions. First of all, Greg, when we asked about the key 3 products to look for in the winter, you looked pretty uncomfortable there, like you wanted to reel off a whole list of other things.
I mean, not really is the answer to that. I'll tell you why I'm uncomfortable, because it's so, it's like me saying, oh, I've got an Olympic distance in 6 weeks. What's the best training program? Without knowing anything about my physiology or biomechanics or experience, etc., etc. I think that the thing that we sometimes think is that with nutrition, that it's something that we can just use ubiquitously and everybody uses the same thing, and we should all be eating exactly the same. And absolutely untrue, because and certainly on a call like this, I mean, there are people at different stages of their life, with different conditions, with different training loads, with different experiences and loads from things like work and family, etc. So I think my discomfort was based around the fact that actually it's quite a complex picture, and really difficult just to titrate into three top recommendations.
And guys, one of the things, sorry to jump in there, one of the things Greg mentioned in his 3, which is a multivitamin mineral. Yes, the supply of vitamins and minerals is key, but that doesn't even go near the level of antioxidants you actually require in your diet when you're training at that level. And that's what can be a massive spectrum of cellular damage to the body when you're upping your training levels. So just to put that in perspective for everyone, if you're totally sedentary and you're sat on your ass and you do not move during the week, you don't train at all, you don't go to the gym, you don't go for your 10,000 steps or whatever it is, you're looking about 3,500 units of damage. We call this ORAX, which is oxygen radical absorption capability. So 3,500 units of damage per day. As soon as you become mildly active, maybe you're doing your 10,000 steps 4 or 5 days a week, every other day, as the government tries to get people to do, what have you, you jump to at least 5,000. If you're someone going to the gym 2 or 3 times a week, putting in a couple of hours a week, your average jumps to about 7,500 units of damage per day. If you're jumping to somebody who's doing 10 hours of physical training a week, which is still, I'm sure pretty much everyone on this call is there, you're looking at 10,000 units plus. If you're an Olympic athlete or you're doing triathlon, multi-sport, you're clocking 15, 20 hours, 30 hours. Myself and Greg were 35 hours a week when we were young in the sport of modern pentathlon. You're looking at 12 to 15,000 units of damage a day. So if you track that back and put that into some kind of prospectus, if you're undergoing treatment for cancer and you're doing radiotherapy and that type of thing, you're hitting 15,000 units of damage a day in the body. The same level of cellular damage you are if you're training 15, 20, 25 hours a week. So, it's not a straightforward question, is it?
No, which almost leads me on to the next question, which was in terms of being able to identify where the issues are or where you need extra help. I guess we've seen the growth of blood testing coming in a little bit into endurance sport. Is that the best way to go about trying to work out what it is an individual needs, or is there another method that you would use, Greg?
So that's a great question. It's a really interesting one. I mean, my practice was on Harley Street, and let me tell you, there was an awful lot of blood testing going on Harley Street. And weirdly enough, the people that were doing the blood testing were also selling the supplements. It was strange. I'll tell you a story once. I had a guy come in to see me, and when he came in, and this is no word of a lie, he had a carrier bag full. And I said to him, what's in the carrier bag? He said, oh, it's my supplements. And I said to him, I wonder what that was rattling when it came down the stairs. I mean, what this guy was on, I mean, I just couldn't even explain to you. I mean, and basically what it was just a charlatan. He'd been sold by a charlatan who was trying to make money, and they make their money off the back of the supplements, not necessarily the blood test itself. So I think, again, it comes down to quality. I think be very, very careful when you're looking into those type of areas. I mean, the next step down from that is DNA testing to identify what's going to work for you. And I mean, let's not get deep into this, otherwise you're getting to my old chestnut when it comes to this, is that there are an awful lot of people who will try and make an awful lot of money out of you for no real value and no real return. I think to some extent, what I would say on that question is keep it simple. I think the first thing to do is that with a food first approach is just to make sure that you are delivering what is required for a healthy, balanced diet. You know, the vegetables, the fruit that is in the diet, etc., etc. And then I think it's about just monitoring what your performance is. You know, what's going on. You know, and are you recovering well from training? Have you got delayed onset muscle soreness, which tends to go well beyond the 72 hours that we would expect to see? Are you struggling with energy levels in training and in daily life? Are you picking up repetitive upper respiratory tract infections, so coughs and colds on a continual basis? And all of those sort of things will then start to indicate where some supplementation, I would say first, a tweak in your food first approach, but where supplementation may be useful. So I think it's not a very simple answer of take a blood test, here's the result, you should be taking this. That to my mind, and I've worked in this sector for over 3 decades now, that magic wand doesn't occur. It is very much about working on an individualized, bespoke approach and actually tracking what you're doing as an individual and see what your response is. And then by making interventions, you can then see what the response is. So by changing the diet, by adding supplements in, has that alleviated the problem that you've got? If it has, then that probably tells you were deficient in the first place and it's the right thing to do. If it hasn't, then try something different. Is that, I mean, it's a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but
no,
to
but
an incredibly complex question.
But when we're talking to athletes, you know, that exactly what you said, feel low on energy for days at a time. Yeah, I've got my 3rd cold in 2 months. You know, all these things. And actually, you know, I think even we as coaches pretty much know, well, you probably need to increase X, Y, or Z to counteract whichever issue. And if you do and it stops having the problem, then, you know, you're probably along the right lines there, aren't you? Like you said, an awful lot of, you know, like, for example, if you were taking more vitamin C than your body required, you know, there's some very obvious signs, isn't there? Like you might be on the loo quite a bit, and you know, you can very easily just find out what the issues are if you're taking too much of something. And a lot of these water soluble things have passed through the body fairly easy, and you can actually even tell. You know, I think is it the B vitamins, for example? You have a rather fluorescent coloured trip to the toilet, don't you, sometimes? And it's pretty obvious when you've got enough of something in the system, isn't it? So,
well, I'll just be a little bit careful with that. I mean, you're absolutely right, but you know, it's quite an acute phase response. So you take a multivitamin which is high in B vitamins, and you will get fluorescent wee, but usually only on the first pass. It doesn't tend to continue on, and I think being very careful about dark urine. So again, you know, a classic example of this is when it comes to hydration status. Now, you know, I have done across my career, we have done everything from hematocrit, from blood analysis, through to osmolality, through to a whole host of other measures to look at hydration status. And the bottom line is, when it comes down to it, the best way to monitor hydration is through body weight and through urine color and volume. And what you're looking for is a straw-colored urine of good volume, and you're looking for a sustained and maintained body weight. And also remember that when you are going to rehydrate, you have to think that actually we uptake around about 66% of the fluid that we ingest. The rest is urinated out, and so therefore, for every kilo of body weight lost in a training session, for example, and if it's a single acute training session, that will be almost exclusively fluid. For every kilo lost, you need to take in 1.5 kilos, which is effectively 1.5 liters of fluid, to rehydrate that. And again, something that endurance athletes are notoriously bad at, particularly Brits, which is an interesting one. When I've worked internationally, other nationalities are very good at drinking. We are dreadful at drinking, Brits, and even worse in the winter because you don't get the drive to thirst. So I think just simple things that we can do just to monitor on a regular basis, and what that will do is it'll inform what your response should be and how you should approach it.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I've got a few questions from people on the call. If you can just fire these at you. Very simple one to start with from one of our youngest athletes. Can I use vitamin D if I'm 15?
Yes is the answer to that.
Simple that. Yeah.
One from Claire saying, when looking at vitamin D intake, what's your views on the more prescription versions such as Adcal D3 or Calcichew? And then follows on with, and if also taking one of your collagen supplements, would the calcium interact with the collagen at all?
So, I mean, James, you can pick this up, mate, but I think the things, if you're getting something on prescription, what you can, one of the critical problems with supplementation is that supplementation sits under the banner of food, and the regulation on food is much less than it is in the pharmaceutical industry, so on drugs. If you're getting something that is prescribed, and so therefore is coming through a clinical route, invariably the controls on that product are better, so therefore the quality is much more likely to be better. And so to some extent, it's probably a better product to get. Interesting enough, it's incredibly expensive if you are to purchase it. Luckily, we have the NHS to give it away for free. Is there any interaction with collagen? No, is the answer to that.
So coming back, I mean, the branded pharmaceutical, it all depends, in my experience, when I've looked at this over the last number of years, it all depends on what product you're actually buying. So if it's obviously got a drug-based background, then fine, it's pharmaceutical grade. But pharmaceutical companies that are making a natural supplement, so for example, a basic vitamin D3, the quality and the grade of a pharmaceutical produced vitamin D3 and our vitamin D3, there is no difference. Simple as that. All the difference is the fact that it's produced by a pharmaceutical practice manufacturer. They will have a lot more costs because they're having to jump through a lot more hoops, a lot more regulation. 9 out of 10 times they're much bigger than normal manufacturing setups, and because of that, the modeling of the end product has to reflect the running costs of the facility. So you're paying more for the regulatory basis. Now, to give you another good example of this, is that in supplementation, there are many brands out there who actually have two prices for the same thing. So you can look at a protein, for example. I'm not going to name names, but you guys, I'm sure, know the brands. You look at a protein that is $34.95 for, let's say, a kilogram or whatever the mass is, but exactly the same product with the Informed Sport label on it is $39.95. It's identical product. It's the exact same batch. The only difference is that it's got that Informed Sport label on. So what are you paying for? Well, you're paying for the fact that when you register an Informed Sport product, there is an upfront cost to register that product, and it's about £2,000, depending on how many products you actually register with Informed Sport at the same time. And then you have a batch test cost. So if you're going through batches really quickly, and you're not doing big volume manufacturing, that means that you're having to test every single batch, and there's a cost to that. And then on top of that, again, there is something called a ghost test, which is when LGC will actually go and buy your product from multiple different retailers and check the quality. So you've got sort of three different houses here. You've got your pharmaceutical house making vitamin D3. The reason why their D3 is more expensive is because they're normally much bigger facility, bigger setup, much more costs gone into it, and it's passed on to the customer. You've got your normal nutritional manufacturer that can bring the costs down to the lowest possible, and they quite often actually sacrifice quality. And then you've got your Informed Sports range of products, which is ensuring quality every single time. Now, should a brand do a product that's got a badge on and costs more? Because you guys will go, oh, I'm happy to pay £5 extra because it's got a badge on it. The reality is it's more than likely exactly the same batch. We don't do that. I think it's something that I think is absolutely ludicrous and ridiculous in the industry. The industry is not regulated enough and it allows certain brands to take a cowboy attitude towards their pricing concept. So that's my view on supplementation. Oh, get off my horse!
That's the rant. Get off that high horse, for God's sake.
Hey, I'm a modern pentathlete. I might be forced to soon.
Yeah, you might. Yeah. Just a final question, which I think I'll skim read it quickly. This is from someone that's been using your products for several months. Diet is okay, could be better. Drinks a lot of lactose-free, semi-skimmed and skimmed milk, a litre a day. It's easy because she likes it. Also has a protein shakes just because. Trains 8 to 10 hours a week. Has been using U-perform from a collagen point of view. Given the fact she's doing 8 to 10 hours a week, doesn't really get ill, doesn't really get injured, is she overdoing it, taking the U-perform product? Has she maybe optimized it? Or and I think obviously there's so many variables to this in terms of you need to know what the rest of the diet was like.
Yeah.
But just in terms of like probably differentiating like what the collagen is doing from what maybe the milk and the recovery shake and stuff like that. So you got anything to add to that? So that sort of,
I think, first off, you can't overdose on collagen. I think if you take very high quantities in a single bolus in a single sitting, what it can do is cause a little bit of tummy upset, but fundamentally you can't overdose on it. So if that's a concern, I wouldn't worry about that. I think that the second thing is, look, no injury, no illness. The sort of extension question on that was, I would say, how is training going? Is it progressing well? Are you recovering well? Is performance on an upward trajectory? If all of those are true, then I would tend to suggest that you're doing exactly the right thing. Is that everything sounds good? And I think whilst it remains on that positive trajectory, I would stick with what you've got. I think the only other thing to think about really is that at times when you know that there are going to be significant changes in, for example, training volume, and that can come in the guide. Remember, volume is intensity, frequency, and duration related. So it could be any of those, but invariably it's intensity which is the most potent in terms of damaging stimulus. So if you've got significant changes coming to that, or if you've got significant changes to lifestyle, which often, invariably we all do within this, and obviously time of year, as we've already spoken to, then what I would do is not sort of sit back and think, look, what I'm doing is working fine, I'll just keep doing that. I think, again, it's just about monitoring, planning, and making sure that you stay on top of things as they're going to change. And then in doing that, you'll make slight modifications to your approach with your diet and your nutrition. And in doing that, you'll make sure that you stay on that positive trajectory.
I think the only tweak to what she's doing is, from looking at the level and the volume of training at 8 to 10 hours a week, there's quite a lot of cellular damage going on there, just because of the volume of training. So if I was to tweak her supplementation program at all, I would say it'd be worthwhile looking at the active berries, which is a massively powerful antioxidant. Just 2 capsules a day, you can deliver 10,000 units of repair from a cellular point of view, that ORAC unit of repair. So, 8 to 10 hours of physical exercise a week, it's a good level.
So I was going to come on to this, like antioxidant side of things now, but I think another thing to probably add is your diet, your training isn't the same every day. So your diet should be flexible around that. So maybe, how much protein you're taking in might vary slightly on day to day, but caloric intake, etc., will also vary. And actually, this probably leads me nicely onto like the antioxidant thing. You guys obviously do like these active berries and super greens, and these are like trendy sounding things to take, aren't they? But behind it all is, there's probiotics in there, there's antioxidants in there, and they're probably the two I'd pick up on. Is my questions would be, well, one's a bit of a loaded question, is the use of probiotics in the gut as first line of defense in terms of, you know, keeping a good functioning gut, and how, you know, what's your views on how important that is as to how the whole body's working. And then also from an antioxidant point of view, the timing of antioxidants, because there's the, you know, this is possibly one where maybe immediately after certain training isn't the right timing, as you know, some research would state as well. So maybe just elaborate on those two sort of like key things.
Okay. Two big questions.
Yeah.
And I'll probably miss one of them. I mean, let's go with the antioxidant thing first. I think, you know, what's really important. So, you know, having spent, having published an awful lot around this area, and having done a lot of work in it, it's around, really what it is this balance between damage and adaptation. And I think what we have to be very careful of is not to constantly dampen the damage that we are creating as part of training, because that damage is the fundamental to adaptation. So there was a lovely penchant back in the 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s of ice baths. I don't know if you guys sort of think back and remember that.
Yeah.
And it was just like, oh, you got ice bath after everything. You got to do ice bath after everything. And I was doing my PhD at the time, and I remember having a conversation with a mate of mine about it. I said, I just don't understand it. It's that the muscle damage that we're creating during training is the stimulus for adaptation. So why are we then immediately trying to blunt that damage by blunting the pro-inflammatory response in the muscle? Because what they eventually do is actually blunt the adaptive response. And of course, lo and behold, a decade later, research that then came out that showed that icing, the ice bathing following every single session was counterproductive and led to a dampening of adaptation. Now that's not to say that ice bathing is not valuable, incredibly valuable. In fact, tomorrow I'm on another children in need challenge on Friday, and then next Tuesday another one. I'll be using ice bathing in those challenges, because what I'm trying to do is limit that pro-inflammatory response and reduce the muscle damage in order to get through a 24-hour challenge. So acutely, there's a real value to it. Chronically, much less value to it, if no value, in fact, a negative value to it. So to come on to the antioxidant piece is that the production of a whole host of things, but things like reactive oxygen species, which occur during arduous, basically under stress, exercise being a stress, is that what we have to be very careful of is that we don't blunt that too much. Because if we blunt that stress response too much, what we do is we then blunt the adaptation. Okay. Now, what we have to do is be very careful, and that is that there's sort of a balancing act. But what we don't want to do is blunt it too much, so we blunt adaptation. But equally, what we don't want to do is let it run rampant and cause excessive damage, because then that excessive damage creates problems. It becomes, rather than being physiological, it becomes pathophysiological. And so it's this fine line that we tread as we go through here. Now, one again about the indication, one of the key things about training is that when you get a dramatic change in training volume, what happens is that stress rises dramatically. And so therefore you get a big surge in these damaging byproducts that we start to produce. Now, over time, the body will adapt, and it adapts with its own innate antioxidant defense system mechanism. But of course, in those early phases, it cannot cope. And so what starts to happen is you get excessive damage. So actually the timing of when you're taking these supplements is really important. And then you add on top of that is where is it coming from normally? Well, it's coming normally from food first. And of course, if you're in a period of time where you're traveling a lot, whether you're under pressure, classic winter time in the Northern Hemisphere, where access to a wide variety of fruit in particular fruit and vegetables can be somewhat limited, then at that point you're not actually consuming the levels of antioxidants that you need, and so therefore antioxidant supplementation becomes important again. So again, there's sort of lots of nuances within this, but you're absolutely right. In general, the antioxidant approach is, people say, when would you take it? Well, you just effectively take it in the morning. It's not like protein where you would take it in that 30-minute window post-exercise, like carbohydrates that you try and concentrate in a 30-minute window post-exercise. Actually, what we're trying to do is we're just trying to effectively, if you imagine antioxidant capacity as a battery, we're just constantly sort of dripping. We've got it dripping up and just keeping it full across time, rather than thinking we need to hammer it in at one particular moment in time. But don't always think of damage as being a bad thing. Damage is our friend. What we want to make sure is that we don't get excessive damage, and make sure that we control that damage in the chronic sense.
Yeah, good, great. Yeah, and I don't know, do you want to just, I don't know, just very briefly touch on the use of, probiotics and that gut health thing, just, I think these are all just good bits of education, because the way I see people leaving this call is, for example, some people might have been doing 20 hours a week leading up to an Ironman, and are now heading into, pre-season on 8 to 10 hours a week. They don't need as much protein, but actually they're not, and they might be going, well, actually, I can swap things up here and probably actually have like a healthier body, healthier food intake. Maybe I'll go to my local farm shop and buy better food, whatever. But it's, I suppose, by just providing, this insight on the vitamin D, multivit, the antioxidants, and then, the one I picked up on in your super greens was the probiotic side of things, which I always think is good from an immune system point of view.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you what I can do is I wrote about this ad infinitum during the pandemic, because it's the one thing that wound me up most of all. It was this idea that we sort of just waited for a vaccine, when there's lots of things that we can do to enhance our immune system, that we can optimize the function of our immune system, and the gut microbiome is a fundamental part of that, and is intimately linked with immunity, amongst other things. So I mean, I'll send you a little, if you look at my socials, you'll see some of the stuff. Like, this is like, middle of last year, that I was sending out. There's a whole host of things that we can do. We can reduce caffeine intake, reduce alcohol intake, stop smoking. If anybody does smoke, I have no idea why, but smoking cessation, improve gut microbiome, lots of ways of doing that, but fresh fruit and vegetables, particularly pickled vegetables, so things like sauerkraut, etc., very good source of that. But again, depending on that diet, supplementation can be really valuable just to support that gut microbiome. And then, something that we haven't spoken about, I think we might have mentioned it before in other calls, but sleep and recovery. Sleep is absolutely fundamental to the function of the immune system. So making sure that we get the right quality sleep, and then with things like body weight management, excessive adiposity is a problem for the immune system. Not necessarily a problem for people on this call, but there's a whole host of things that we can be doing, and just sort of almost bringing us full circle back to what we started the conversation on. I wrote a piece when I first became director of research at the BOMC on avoiding winter illness, and I'll happily circulate that so you can take a look at it. It wasn't new at the time, it isn't new now, and it is incredibly simple, but it is absolutely two things that we're trying to do. One is we're trying to enhance our own innate immune system, and we can do that through all those processes that we spoke about. And then the other thing is, what we're trying to do is avoid exposure to pathogens. And that comes down to a whole host of things that we can do ourselves. And that is washing our hands on a regular basis, avoiding contact with eyes, nose, mouth, avoiding overcrowded places where possible, particularly where people are carrying pathogens with them, making sure that our diet and nutrition is optimized to enhance the immune function, but also to avoid particular issues. So there's lots of very simple things that we can be doing, that we should be doing. But interesting enough, a good mate of mine, Michael Mosley, who's the sort of BBC doc, has just written a book. I'm pretty sure it's just come out, or it's about to come out, on the gut microbiome and the central role that gut microbiome plays in health, generally in health, but particularly in immune function. So certainly with our super greens, what we've done is we've focused on the role of that and trying to optimize that from a supplement perspective. A long answer, sorry.
No, it's good, great. Yeah, no, I mean, that's exactly it, and then you bring all of what you just said to summarize there back to an athlete's point of view. Why do you want to do all those things? So that you can keep your training consistent. It's and actually optimize how you feel, how you recover. So I think, from our point of view, why are we behind quality of food, quality of the supplements you choose to take,
You know, things like the collagen. You know, it's all about injury prevention, good health. You know, that's what builds good athletes. Because one of our big beliefs is like, you know, engaging athletes long term keeps them in the sport for a long time. And if we can keep those athletes in the sport for a long time, they tend to get good as long as they've not had too much disruption to training. So all of this is like, it's real basics. Everyone's so into like the latest little fad and getting that extra 1% or whatever. Whereas this is like the 90%, isn't it? You know, like this is how you get someone from, you know, a lower level to a very good level without anything overly complicated, really. It's all pretty sensible stuff we're talking about here. So, yeah, great.
You know, it is that. It's, you know, 1,500 quid on a back disc is of no value if you can't push the pedals.
Yeah, but they look really, really cool, don't they?
Oh, they look cool. They look cool in the transition area until you get on it and people realize that you can't push a pedal.
I always say that the coolest looking bike in transition is just the first one back to T2. So it doesn't matter what it looks like. So that'll be the guy that's looked after himself the best. So look, guys, I don't know if there's anything else from your, but I think, you know, we've covered quite a lot there, and you know, we'll share this out to the wider group, which is you know, growing all the time. You know, I think if anyone's got any questions, they can get in touch with, like, through the U-perform website. They can speak to any of the coaches, and obviously, you know, I can see some of our guys from Total Endurance Nutrition are on the call as well. These guys are pretty clued up on this, you know, big believers in food first as well. And interesting, I know some of them did some work with the antioxidant thing, which, you know, is why I asked the question about when to take it and stuff. So really appreciate your time this evening, guys. And we'll repost the video tomorrow morning with, you know, all the usual ways to, you know, get a bit of a deal off these guys on any of the stuff you might need, and maybe start a conversation on the Facebook group this morning, you know, about what I was talking about as being flexible around your week, but also around the season we're in, and maybe rethinking your plan for the winter to get through it in the best way. It is a bit different to how you're getting through maybe your race season. So great, brilliant, guys.
Cheers,
Great,
guys.
thanks for having us on.
Been our
Great to
pleasure.
chat.
Very much. Cheers.
Speak to you soon.